Imagine turning on your television in the middle of a power outage, not plugging it into any socket, not connecting any wires, and yet watching your favorite movie in crystal clear HD while the entire neighborhood sits in darkness wondering how you did it. Because what I'm about to tell you sounds like something straight out of a science fiction novel, but it's real, it's happening right now. And the man behind this jaw-dropping breakthrough is a Zimbabwean inventor named Maxwell Chikumbutso, a man who has been quietly reshaping the boundaries of technology while the world barely paid attention. And today, his latest creation, a self-powered television that operates without being connected to any power source, without relying on electricity from the grid, without batteries in the conventional sense, is sending shockwaves across the globe, making scientists scratch their heads and leaving major tech giants wondering whether to embrace him or crush him. Because this is not just a gadget. This is a revolution, a disruption so massive that if it scales globally, it could bankrupt utility companies, destabilize entire energy markets, and rewrite the history of consumer electronics forever. And yet here we are in a tiny workshop in Zimbabwe, with a man who dared to dream differently, a man who looked at the cords hanging from your TV and thought to himself, why should we need these wires at all? Why can't a TV run itself? Why can't it generate its own energy without solar panels? Without wind turbines, without a plug in the wall? And what he came up with is something no one expected, something that mainstream scientists will tell you is impossible, something that breaks the very rules of how we understand power systems. But before we dive into how this mysterious device actually works, let's talk about Maxwell. Because his story is as incredible as his invention. He wasn't born into wealth. He didn't attend MIT or Oxford. He didn't have millions in venture capital. Backing him up, no, Maxwell grew up in a humble neighborhood in Harare, Zimbabwe, in a world where power cuts were normal, where access to stable electricity was a privilege, and it was in this environment that he started tinkering with electronics, taking apart old radios, experimenting with makeshift circuits, driven by an unshakable curiosity about how things worked. And as he grew older, that curiosity turned into obsession, an obsession to solve problems that big corporations ignored. Problems like unreliable power, expensive energy, and dependence on resources that many in Africa couldn't afford. And while the rest of the world debated about renewable energy, building billion-dollar solar farms and gigantic wind turbines, Maxwell was working in silence, building prototypes, failing countless times, facing ridicule from so-called experts who laughed at his ideas, telling him that perpetual energy was a fantasy, that machines that powered themselves could never exist because of the laws of physics. But Maxwell didn't listen. He refused to let their doubts kill his vision. And after years of sleepless nights, years of sacrifice, he unveiled something that nobody thought possible. A television that powers itself, that keeps running without any external energy source. And when he first demonstrated it, people thought it was a trick. They thought there must be a hidden battery, maybe a wire somewhere off camera. But there was nothing, it was real. And even now, engineers are trying to figure out how he did it. Because according to Maxwell, the technology uses principles of radio frequency energy and magnetic fields to harvest energy from the surrounding environment. But not in the way solar panels or regular wireless chargers do. No, this is something completely different. A closed-loop system that generates enough energy internally to sustain itself indefinitely. Meaning that once the TV is built, it doesn't need to draw from any grid, it doesn't add to your electricity bill, it doesn't require maintenance like traditional energy systems. And if this sounds insane, that's because it challenges everything we've been taught. Because for over a century, we believed that every device needs a source, whether that's a battery or a plug. But Maxwell's TV says otherwise. And now think about the implications. Imagine a world where every TV, every appliance in your home, every device you own runs independently without wires, without bills, without infrastructure. Imagine what that means for rural communities in Africa, Asia, South America, places where power lines are a dream. Imagine what that means for disaster zones, for emergency shelters, for refugee camps, where people could have light, communication, entertainment without needing generators or fuel. This is not just a cool gadget, this is liberation from energy dependence. And yet, the moment news of this invention started spreading, the skeptics came out in full force, some calling it a scam, others demanding scientific proof, and Maxwell welcomed them all, saying, "Come and see for yourselves." And those who saw it couldn't explain it, but they couldn't deny it either, because the TV worked exactly as claimed, running hour after hour without a single cable connected. And if you think the big tech players didn't notice, think again, because companies like Samsung, LG, Sony, and even energy corporations are now watching closely, some perhaps reaching out quietly, because this invention, if commercialized, could completely destroy their existing models. After all, these companies make billions selling not just TVs but also accessories, power solutions, backup systems. And here comes a man from Zimbabwe who says you don't need any of that anymore. And let me tell you, History shows us what happens when one person threatens entire industries. There's resistance, there's pushback, there's suppression. And Maxwell knows this. He's been down this road before, because this is not his first groundbreaking invention. He's the same man who built an electric car that charges itself, a generator that doesn't need fuel, and each time, the world either ignored him or tried to discredit him. But he never stopped, and now with the self-powered TV, the spotlight is back, brighter than ever, and the question is, will the world embrace this or fight it? Because let's be honest, the energy industry is one of the most powerful sectors on the planet, and they're not going to just sit back and watch as someone makes their entire infrastructure obsolete. But the beauty of Maxwell's approach is that he's not just thinking about profit, he's thinking about impact, about how this could lift millions out of energy poverty, how it could give kids in rural areas access to educational programs, how it could keep families connected without worrying about bills or blackouts. And when you see the device in action, it's hard not to be amazed. The sleek design, the fact that it looks like any other modern TV except for one small difference. There's no cord dangling from the back, no socket, no plug. Just a screen that lights up and stays on for hours, for days. And you can't help but ask, how is this possible? And that's where Maxwell smiles and says, sometimes the future doesn't wait for permission. And when Maxwell says that, you realize he's not just an inventor, he's a visionary. Someone who refuses to be limited by the so-called laws written by people who said things like heavier-than-air flight was impossible before the Wright brothers took off. Someone who looks at impossibility as nothing more than a challenge. And now the challenge is for the world to catch up because what he's built is more than a television. It's a statement. A statement that energy independence is possible, that the days of being tied to grids, wires, and monthly bills could soon be over if only humanity is willing to embrace it. And yet, while many cheer him on, there are those plotting against him. Because if you control energy, you control economies, governments, even wars, and a device like this threatens to take that control away from the elite and put it back into the hands of ordinary people, and that scares them. Because the entire global system was built on the assumption that energy is scarce. That it's expensive, that it must be mined, drilled, refined, transported, and built, and Maxwell's TV says none of that is true anymore. Because if a television can run itself, why not a refrigerator? Why not an entire house? Why not a car? And when you ask that question, you realize how big this really is. And the truth is, Maxwell has already hinted at this future, because alongside his self-powered TV, he has prototypes of other devices using similar technology. And if those ever hit the mainstream market, the power companies, the oil giants, the utility monopolies will crumble like sandcastles in a storm, and they know it, which is why they'll do everything to stop him, just like they've tried before, because this man has faced death threats, bribes, lawsuits, smear campaigns, you name it, they've thrown it at him, but every time he comes back stronger, and this time he's not backing down, because this invention is too important, too transformative, and if you're wondering how he protects his work, he's been very strategic, filing patents, building alliances, and most importantly, using publicity as his shield, because when the world is watching, it's harder for them to make you disappear, and that's why we're talking about this today, to shine a light on something that could change lives. Because let's be real, in a world drowning in climate change debates, rising energy costs, and billions of people without electricity, an invention like this is not just innovation, it's salvation. And speaking of salvation, think about what this means for the environment. No more coal plants spewing smoke, no more oil spills destroying oceans, no more massive solar farms taking up land, no more giant wind turbines killing birds, just devices that sustain themselves, quietly, cleanly, endlessly. And when you compare that to our current energy model, it's almost embarrassing, because for all our talk of progress, we're still stuck on systems that waste, pollute, and exploit, while a man in Zimbabwe builds something in his garage that could make them all obsolete. And here's the crazy part. He's not doing this with billions of dollars like Silicon Valley. He's doing it with limited resources, often out of his own pocket, driven by pure passion. And if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will, because it proves that innovation isn't about where you were born or how rich you are. It's about imagination, resilience, and the courage to ignore the voices that say you can't. And Maxwell has all three in abundance. And as this story spreads, you have to wonder, what happens next? Will governments step in to regulate? Will corporations swoop in to buy him out, or will he find a way to bring this to the masses before they can stop him? And that's the big question. Because history tells us that disruptive tech often gets buried. Think about Nikola Tesla, a genius who dreamed of free wireless energy for all, who built towers that could transmit power through the air. And yet, where are those towers now gone? Destroyed by those who feared losing control. And the same playbook could be used on Maxwell. But this time, the internet changes everything, because now information spreads like wildfire, and the more people know, the harder it is to erase the truth. And that's why we need to keep talking about this, sharing it, demanding answers. Because if this works, and it does, then humanity deserves it, not just the rich, not just the powerful, everyone. Because why should a child in a remote village grow up without access to knowledge and entertainment when a self-powered TV could bring it to them? Why should families go bankrupt? Paying utility bills when technology like this exists? Why should entire countries remain energy slaves when liberation is possible? And as dramatic as that sounds, it's real, because I've seen the footage, I've seen the device working, and it's not a magic trick, it's engineering brilliance. And that brilliance comes from a man who never gave up. And now that brilliance is out in the open, the question is, will we as a society embrace it or reject it out of fear and greed? And if you think the tech giants aren't sweating, think again, because companies like Apple and Google are already exploring wireless power transfer. They've spent billions trying to make wireless charging a reality. And here comes Maxwell, skipping 10 steps ahead, doing what they said couldn't be done. And the irony is delicious, because while they were busy selling incremental upgrades and overpriced gadgets, he was solving a problem that affects billions. And now the tables have turned, because if he plays this right, if he partners with the right people, he could leapfrog them all, and not just in TVs, but in every industry that runs on electricity. And that's why, even as I tell you this, negotiations are probably happening behind closed doors, offers being made, pressure being applied. But let's hope Maxwell stays true to his vision, because this isn't just about money, it's about humanity. And inventions like this don't come often, maybe once in a century. And when they do, they change everything. They redefine what's possible, they make the impossible ordinary. And years from now, people might look back and say, remember when TVs needed wires? Remember when electricity bills were a thing? And they'll laugh, because by then, everything will be self-powered. And it all started here, with a man in Zimbabwe who believed in his dream more than the world believed in its doubts.